welcome to a film a day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today I am throwing back to a popular, again, comedy blockbuster of, 2 years ago now. I remember this coming out and thinking, I must catch the latest Seth Rogen produced comedy. And for whatever reason, I just didn't get round to it. But it was an interesting gimmick, I must admit. And so finally, I can talk about Good Boys. And it's interesting, I suppose, because looking back at the teens sort of bromance road trip or sort of a quest story, this is a tried and tested plot line that has been, throwing all the way back to things like Corky's, that sort of group of boys, coming of age, they're sort of learning about themselves, their friendships, their relationships, and then, they're sort of having a big life change. And we've seen it done, time and time again, generationally. But the fact of the matter is that there's always been this sort of discrepancy. When you go back to those sort of 80s sort of sex comedies, you would watch them with the mindset that actually they look older than they are. So you feel like you're watching people in their 20s act like 18-year-olds. And then, of course, the generation in which I sort of got into that kind of comedy is sort of more your sort of American Pie era. And they felt a bit more sort of age correct, but and I suppose the age that I was at meant that they seemed older than me, and there was something quite exciting to see these sort of guys coming of age and sort of thinking, that will be something I go through next. And then the crossover point for me was Superbad, and of course I got that sense of, we sort of reached that point where all of a sudden it leaned much more towards embarrassment and sort of outsiderishness, whereas the early 80s onwards preferred it to be a bit more everyman in its approach, sort of every guy, whereas when you get to that point, it's much more sort of your couple of goofballs, two guys who absolutely adore each other, but they're definitely outsiders, sort of losers in the general social strata. But even at that age, there was always that strange thing about, of course, the way the teenagers act, the way you'd see them perceived on screen, and their relatability. And it's something which you notice a lot more with sort of teen dramas, is that thing where everyone feels like they're older, even if they're a compatible age to, say when I was 15 or 18, you tend to, I'm the same age as them, but they still feel older. Of course, the reason being is that they're being played by adults playing teenagers. And so you get to this point, and of course I'm at an age now where that kind of comedy, unless it's going to appeal to sort of a retro sense of it, kind of like Superbad did. I think Superbad definitely appealed to an 80s aesthetic, but if they're doing one much more traditionally, as a man, swiftly approaching his 30s, my relatability to that experience is going to be significantly lessened. And then you get Good Boys. And Good Boys is such an interesting way to approach this, because the other side of the spectrum, you have your kids going on an adventure story, which I suppose is sort of there's a real compatibility between kids going on an adventure and young teens going on an adventure. And you've got your Goonies and your Stand By Me's, group of boys, or, having some kind of childhood sort of romp. But of course, in that respect, you had that problem of adults writing for children, and those children being the sort of dreamlike, perfect children. And then that worked for those kind of films, especially because they were a younger age. But I think when you sort of hit that tween era, I think it's incredibly difficult to capture the experience of children of that age, because they're not kids having sort of childlike whimsical adventures, but of course they're not, teenagers having sort of this sort of sex comedy kind of storyline. And what I will credit Good Boys with is the fact that it seems to marry the two stories together really well. And in terms of sort of the writing of these kids, because, like I say, the problem with younger kids, or those sorts of stories that's, 80 stories, is that, again, kids didn't speak probably like kids do now, or at least, contemporary kids did. Because kids now do drop F-bombs, do try and talk about things that are way more mature than they should be. It's just, I don't know if that was always the case, or whether it is just something that's happened. It's a millennial challenge that kids are growing up or experiencing adult, adult-centric things at a younger age, and I'm wanting to, have tiny sips of beer, or go to kissing parties and make it out like this. It's some kind of huge experience, but yeah, there is that sense of marrying together that whimsy with the sort of sex comedy element to it, and it's works so well. And the writing and the acting, I mean, you've got to credit your three leads. They are so good. They have such the right kind of temperament and personality, and each of them has a different characteristic. So it's Max Thorne and Lucas, and the three of them genuinely have really distinctive arcs and personalities, and their quests feel very appropriate to their character. And what's nice about it is it does relate to the experiences of boys at that age. There's something that I of all of these sorts of films that I've seen, this is probably, weirdly, the one that I, looking back, probably relate to the most. That sense of, wanting to be mature, wanting to be seen as cool, but also being super dorky, and then, wanting beers but not really liking them, or wanting to kiss girls because you think that's what you're supposed to do. It's interesting. It's possibly a little younger than I think probably I experienced any of those things, but it gives it an authenticity. It gives it a realism, so that when you go on this quest with these boys, initially it is very obviously presented in a way that makes you go, see from the perspective of the adults watching them, going, these kids, they're finally having their youthful, certain coming of age experiences, just like Max's dad does, where you're sort of charmed by it, even though it's gross and weird. But actually, no matter how low stakes the film is, which is incredibly low stakes, all things considered, you actually get so wrapped up in their friendship and their journey that actually the low stakes become important. You relate them to those same kinds of stakes in other films, where you think, I want them to get to this party, and I want them to get the drone, and you got those two teenage girls who are causing them hassle, and even though you look at the teenage girls and go, you're just as big an idiots, there is that sense of looking up at these older girls thinking, they're quite threatening, and quite, there's something quite authoritarian about them. And yeah, it's funny, really. I mean, 8th Grade came out around the same time as this, and I do wonder, because 8th Grade definitely creates the authentic, that internalised experience of a social media teenager, and I understand, although this is purportedly from my case, that it does create, show a certain kind of female experience. There is an authenticity and an honesty in the way it's represented that I understand that a lot of women have said they relate to, in the same way that Good Boys, this sort of stupidity, grossness, naivety, that strange balance of being sort of cherub-like and also being really gross, yeah, it's definitely something that I recognise if I don't relate to from my own childhood, and I think that's done so well, and it's so funny. You know, the idea that, like, you know, there are moments where someone drops a line, and it is so well done, and the reactions to certain things, you know, and you have this wonderful cameo scene with Stephen Merchant, and honestly, their reactions to him and their interactions with him, it's great. And so once you're sort of invested in them and their stakes and their journey, when you get to things like the crossing of the highway, you genuinely are quite like concerned about these boys, and it's really fun, and it's nice to be able to watch something that's fun, low stake, but also, you know, you see the importance in the eyes of these boys. And again, like I say, there is that coming of age aspect to it. I mean, as I said, the sex roms often refer to sort of 18, you know, Superbad and the American Pies and all those films normally refer to sort of guys who are coming into adulthood and their friendships are changing and their relationships are coming to an end or changing in some way. You know, American Pie specifically made a big deal of that. But I think we're at a point now where we want to acknowledge also the younger changes. Like I said, with 8th grade, that was, you know, you see the girl go through this huge emotional experience that deserves validation. And in the same way, the friendship of these boys, you genuinely see them changing and growing apart and recognizing that it isn't the case that they're friends from kindergarten through their life, that they will change and find their own groups, and they'll still care about each other, but it won't be the same as it was. And I think, you know, and I think we are coming to that age when perhaps we're circling back to sort of that Stranger Things style, where we actually do want to start telling stories about that kind of age group again, as we did in the 80s with the Stand By Me's and the Goonies, because it has been rested for some time now. But yeah, it was fun. It was a really fun, rompy film. Really, really good watch. If you can tolerate, you know, incredibly foul language, sex talk from 12-year-olds, and sort of their reactions to drugs, which is a very positive reaction to drugs, you know, all things considered, but sort of their naive and awkward way that they react to the way they come across the drugs is very funny. But yeah, and you know, if you can tolerate all of that, it is a funny and fun film. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share the video, because this all helps me in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Check out my back catalogue of over 200 videos. That's right, I've crossed the 200 line. And follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I tweet about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube, either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.